Good morning. So, we are in John chapter 9 this morning. All right. Flipping over to John. So, John chapter 9, verse 1. Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. So, let's take a look at Romans. Let's flip over to Romans chapter 8. Okay, so if you're just hopping in, we just looked at how the blind man, right? Jesus says it wasn't that the blind man sinned, and it wasn't that his parents sinned. In fact, as you're flipping to Romans 8, or before I flip that way, so what's their mindset? What are the Jews thinking right now as they talk to Jesus? And what they are thinking is that because the man is suffering, he's experiencing hardship, it must mean that it's a consequence of sin. That he wouldn't have been born blind if it hadn't have been the result of sin. Now, there's some truth to that. In fact, sin from the fall, way back to Adam, that created all of these things: blindness, death, suffering, and evil. But they thought, okay, he would have been born blind because he sinned, but he was born that way. So he couldn't have sinned before he was born to deserve this. So maybe it was his parents. Maybe because his parents had done something bad that they were punished with being made blind. And so that is what they're thinking. And Jesus says, no, it's not that at all. It's that the works of God may be shown in him, may be revealed in him, that a good thing could come to pass. Now, hey, firstly, just to welcome me back. You've been watching recordings of me the last couple days, and it's fun to be back and really live again. So hi, Dad. Hi, Estella. And hi, everyone else who's on there. So Romans 8:28. It's a verse that I quote all the time. But it is important to know that verse 29 and 30 come after verse 28 for a reason. And what's funny is I hear certain church groups and people quote Romans 8:29 and 30 all the time, and they talk about this. And then so often we want to quote Romans 8:28 and we talk about that. But we need to remember they go together. So Romans 8:28 says that, and we know that all things work together for the good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purposes. God will work everything out to the good, for the good, to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purposes. For, how? So what's the for? It's there. Therefore. It's the words therefore or for. Why is it there? Well, for whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed into the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. Moreover, whom he predestined, these he called. Whom he called, he also justified. And whom he justified, these he also glorified. So here's the idea, is that God will work everything to the good. And everything you go through and I go through, God knew was going to happen long before we ever experienced it. He knew who our spouses were going to be. He knew who our children were going to be. He knew where we were going to work, and he knew where we were going to get fired or laid off from. Everything was in his foreknowledge. And he did it, and he laid things out, and he got us to certain places for the good. And so that's the idea of these verses 29 and 30, is they're really expounding on verse 28. It's telling us that God has set stuff up, predestined events, made things line up for the good. and his glory. Now, something important about verse 28, though, is that it says God will work all things together for the good. He'll work things together for good to those who love God. Events you may go through and events I may go through, and difficulties and trials and hard times you and I may go through, they might not be for our good necessarily. It might be for God's greater good and for the good of others. You see, you could fall into sin, a grievous sin. And it might not be a good thing. Obviously, it's not a good thing for you. But God can and will use that for the good of others. When we read the Bible and we read the stories of others who have failed before us, it is for our good that we can read those stories and prevent others from going down the path that we went down. Now, it might have been better, gooder, right, for us if we had never done the sin. But God can take that and he can work it to the good. So back in John chapter 9, this blind man, what Jesus is trying to say is that it had nothing to do about sin, about this man sinning or his parents sinning, but he was allowed to be blind so that something more important and greater could come out of it. And that man had to experience a lifetime up until this point of blindness so that good could happen. And good morning, Diane and Estella. It's good to see you guys too. So, here's what's happening is that the man is blind. Jesus is saying, no. This wasn't because of something. It's because God wanted to do something. It wasn't the result of sin. It was so that glory could come. So Jesus says in verse 4, I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no man can work. As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. And so why was this man born blind? Well, this one man we know, because he was going to grow up to be a man who would live contemporaneously. Someone else can let me know how that word goes. But with Jesus, he was going to live contemporaneously with Jesus, the same time as Jesus, and it was timed so that he would be where Jesus would be, so that Jesus could work a miracle in him, and so that he would be written down, his story in the Bible for us years later to hear and learn from. And so again, it wasn't that someone had done something wrong in this instance. It was that God wanted to do something good. And we can go and do something wrong, but God can still work it out for the good. I will say one last thing on that comment before we move on, which is this. David and Bathsheba, God worked for the good. We have learned many lessons because of David and Bathsheba. Solomon was born who would build the temple because of David and Bathsheba. And we have some special psalms that are treasures for those who are hurting and have fallen into sin and need encouragement because of David and Bathsheba. But God could still have raised up a son to build the temple without David and Bathsheba. The Holy Spirit still could have inspired David to write beautiful and amazing psalms without David and Bathsheba. We still could have learned lessons without the story of David and Bathsheba. And David would have had probably a more peaceful household and a longer lasting life of vigor if it hadn't have been for David and Bathsheba. God can work all things to the good, and he will, as his word promises. That doesn't mean we desire for bad things to happen, nor should we live loosely, just expecting, well, God will work it to the good. No, he will. but it'll never be as good as if his children walked in obedience. So that's just a closing thought on that. Verse 6. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with his saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. I could comment on it, but you guys can imagine it. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent, if you want to know what the pool of Siloam is. So he went and washed, and he came back seeing. Now, Estella, I see you are on there, and I know my dad's on there, and I think Pam's usually getting on. For those of us who've been to Israel, just to jog our memories, Pool of Siloam is those steps when you come out of Hezekiah's tunnel in Israel, City of David. You march down, you go down past Warren's shaft, you go into the Hezekiah's tunnel, this little tiny tunnel where there's water running at your feet. And when you come out the other side, there are these big steps, these long rows of steps. That's the edge of the Pool of Siloam. And so we only can see the edge of the steps of one side of the pool, only one small section, but that pool would have been much larger. So just jogging the memory of some of us who I've been to Israel with before or I know have gone, that's the Pool of Siloam. So he sends him down the hill, temple's up high, right, down the hill to the Pool of Siloam. There he goes and washes his feet, and he went and washed, he came back seeing. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, is this not he who sat and begged? Some said, this is he. Others said, he is like him. And he said, I am he. So some are obviously saying, it is him. Others like, no, it's just like his doppelganger. It's a look-alike. But the guy's like, no, it is. It's me. And therefore they said to him, how have your eyes been opened? And he answered and said, a man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to the Pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received sight. Then they said to him, where is he? And he says, I do not know. Watching our time, getting close. And so there's the healing of the man. I think I might just stop there. We'll talk a little bit tomorrow or Monday. Monday we'll talk about the making of clay. It's funny because it'll give me time. Maybe I'll actually go study for once. Shammai and Hillel, these great rabbis. Hillel was Gamaliel's grandfather. We talked about that recently. And how they had all these laws and interpretations of the rules. And so they were not allowed to spit on the ground because on the Sabbath, because the spit, the ball would roll and it would pick up dirt as it rolled, therefore making like a little pathway. I mean, you can imagine if a ball of spit rolled, you'd see a little line where it picked up the dust. Well, that was plowing. Illegal. Also, making clay. That's making mortar, doing brickwork. That's also illegal on the Sabbath. Mixing the mud, with the spit and the dirt. So it's just fascinating to see how the Pharisees are going to get angry about all this and come back at Jesus. And so we'll look more at those Pharisaical laws and rules come next week. But hey, God works all things to the good. Never, ever, ever, ever should we use this as an excuse to live flippantly, to live a life not thinking about the dire consequences of our actions. But rest assured, if it's already happened, if it's in the past, you made a mistake, or something happened to you, and you didn't have anything to do with it. You didn't choose to be born blind. You didn't choose for the company to do layoffs. You didn't choose for coronavirus to hit. Who knows, right? But God can and will and does and has promised to work all things to the good for those who love him and are called according to his purposes. This does not apply to unbelievers. It applies to us believers. Unbelievers might not ever experience this wonderful, beautiful promise. And this one promise alone, I think, could get all of us through every trial. If we could just believe that God works all things to the good, I think we could get through any trial, even if it wasn't our own good. Lord, I know you'll use this, and you will be glorified, and you will be praised, and I will continue to march through, knowing that if I just put my faith in you and you direct my paths, everything will be for your glory. So, to him be all glory, dominion, honor, and praise. Amen. God bless you guys.